Okay, we're all set? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to the Lead the Opposition press conference here today. Today, you see there are quite a large group of us here at the head table. We will be discussing the 2018 annual budget, and therefore I will introduce those who will be speaking. We have on my right Clement Rohi, MP, whose sector is the security sector. So each one of the persons here will deal with a sectoral approach. Further to my right is Dr. Vindya Prasad, whose area relates to social services. On my left, Bishop Juan Ejal, his sector is physical infrastructure. And further to my left is Pauline Sukai, who is responsible for Amerindian affairs. And so we are expected to be joined by Dr. Frank Anthony, who is responsible for the health sector. So we will start today with each of the MPs presenting briefly a quick glimpse in regard to their concerns of their sector with what the 2018 budget has or has not delivered. We are calling a number of our programs that we're having behind the figures 2018 because we believe that the minister has tried to kerfuffle the Guyanese people and confuse and mesmerize people with the use of figures. When one examines them more closely, you find that the devil is in the detail. As we said at just for opening comments, when we dealt with the 2017 budget, one of the complaints in December 2016 was the fact that we didn't have final year figures because the year hadn't ended. And so we are again going through that in 2018. As the year has not ended, what we are seeing in the figures in the big books, as we call volume 1, 2, and 3, and as well as in the projections in the minister's speech, that these are all projections. That's it. They're guesstimates. This in regard to the economy, sectors, and the actual expenditure by ministries and other agencies of the government. So we're not dealing with actual figures that are presented as of December 31st, because that's not where we are. We raised this issue, as I said, in the December 2016 debate, and the Minister of Finance refused to provide the cutoff date used in his budget preparation, both in terms of the macroeconomic projections as well as the sectoral consumption or use of the expenditure in 2016. If we want to have accountability of government expenditure of taxpayers' money, by bringing this matter in December, bringing the budget in December, early budget as they say, and not correspondingly amending the law to change the cutoff date for all the finances, the closure of the books by December 31st, we're caught in this kind of limbo where we've been given figures that are not actual figures, and therefore making the scrutiny of the government expenditure in the year 2017 as in the year 2016 a Herculean and almost impossible task. In fact, in the 2018 budget documents, we are now seeing the actual expenditure under the ministries and agencies for 2016. We did not see that prior because, of course, December 2016 we were dealing with the 2017 budget, and of course the documents seem to have been prepared for that budget around October, like this one for 2018. There is nothing in the budget for women, children, Amerindians, youth, elderly, and disabled. You will recall that in the motion that we tried to get on the floor, we called for the restoration of a number of social safety nets that provided some relief to children, women, elderly. And of course you know that up to now the motion has not been approved, disapproved, or amended, and that our request for Private Members' Day was defeated on more than one occasion. So, but there's nothing there in the budget regards to the most vulnerable and poorest section of the population. I'm sure that my colleague Bishop Edgell will refer to a number of the projects that they have listed in the budget, the majority of which go back to the PVPC administration and which are actually suffering from undue delays over the last 2 years. We recognize that now, very clearly, the reasons why the government ensured that we would not have a private members' day, nor approve our motion, and therefore to prevent us from having the opportunity to debate the 122 measures that we consider will stimulate the economy and bring relief to the people. So we believe this was an example, another example of executive interference in the legislature. The removal of VAT on education came about as a result of serious and consistent pressure. Regrettably, they did not remove VAT on the educational services, so people, especially poor people, have to continue to pay VAT on all education goods. I will now do just some opening comments on my part, and I will now open and ask MP Rohi to lead off.
Thank you, Gail. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin my contribution by stating that I felt a deep sense of disappointment and sadness after having heard the speech by the Minister of Finance, particularly in respect to the social sector and the security sector. Because what happens in the social sector, particularly in relation to issues such as unemployment, etc., poverty, all those issues are, in a sense, related to the fight against criminal activities, crime, drug trafficking, and all the other attendant features of the criminal underworld. Most of what the minister said in the section of the budget which treats with safeguarding public security and rebuilding public trust are issues that have their genesis in the administration of the People's Progressive Party, Civic. The Citizen Security Program 1 and 2 began with the PPPC in government, and this administration, without batting an eyelid, continued with these two programs without even recognizing the tremendous contribution that was made to laying the foundation of citizen security in our country. In addition to that, we heard the minister say that the government collectively held its breath and wondered in respect of the events that took place at the Georgetown prison earlier this year. And I refer to the conflagration and destruction by fire of the Georgetown prisons. What he should have recognized in this speech, or in his contribution, was that this event took place as a result of what I would describe as human negligence on the part of the administration. The People's Progressive Party administration prior to May 2015 initiated reforms at the Georgetown prisons and in fact to the prison system as a whole. And when we took to the Parliament a bill calling for reforms within the prison system and a change in the name of the Guyana Prison Service to the Guyana Prison and Correctional Services, it was thrown out. And we informed the Parliament at the time that this was not to be seen as a cosmetic change. In fact, it was a move aimed at profound changes within the prison system. But lo and behold, the security experts who, outside of Parliament, or as to say outside of government, who felt that they knew all the solutions to the problems, had this major conflagration on their hands. And now we're hearing about them holding their breath and wondering why this event took place. One of the major themes in that section of the budget speech by the minister was this whole question of placing greater emphasis on the safety and protection of citizens. If one were to walk the streets of Georgetown or any other parts of the country and talk to citizens about how they feel about safety and protection, I believe that we would receive we receive different sound bites from the people, the population. In fact, I will speak more about this in the debate, but just to mention one observation, that about 4 or 5 days after the Guyana Police Force B Division had launched their Christmas security plan, which is usually done in every police division, 4 or 5 days after, we had a major robbery on the quarantine of a businessman by the name of Bobby, who runs a business place that appears to be extremely popular with the residents. And this explains the extent to which citizens feel a sense of security in Guyana. We heard also about a comprehensive security plan, or a comprehensive security examination of the security sector. Well, we've been hearing about this ever since the administration came into office almost 3 years ago. They promised to submit this plan to the Parliament for the MPs to examine it. This has never happened. And so much more is to be said about this in the National Assembly during the budget debate. I think police reform, which we're hearing a lot of noise about, is going to attract a tremendous amount of attention during this debate, precisely because of so many unusual developments that are taking place. One of the most recent being the Minister of Public Security actually dismissing the Commission of Police, a measure which he had no authority to execute. So these are some of the issues from a general perspective. I didn't want to get into too many details here. From a general perspective, and the kind of scrutiny that the security sector will come under by me and my colleagues in the course of the upcoming budget debate. And like I said, it was my intention to situate discussion and debate on the security sector within the context of the social agenda of the government, because I see the two as very much interconnected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rohi. We'll now move to Pauline Sukat, who will speak next.
Thank you, Gail. And it's a pleasure to be able to highlight some of the dissatisfaction that I have with the 2018 budget speech and what was presented for with regards to Amerindian development, the 2018 budget offers no significant opportunities to bridge the gap between the hinterland and the coast. And you know, this was the catchphrase that on numerous occasions has been repeated in the Parliament by His Excellency David Granger, including the pre-campaign rhetoric. What we see in 2018 budget is the continuation of the inherited projects and program which the People's Progressive Party, Civic, had established. And this program has been a dismal failure under the current administration, the coalition government. Failure so much that they have been asking for additional time and extension to bring to closure some of these projects which should have been closed since 2015, 2016 mid. And therefore, it begs the question whether there is any seriousness by the coalition government, AFC and APNU AFC government, to ensure that there is a concerted effort to inject investment in the hinterland, to ensure that there's positive opportunities and that the good life for indigenous people will be realized. In fact, the budget proposes an ICT program for hinterland. I would like to say that this project was proposed by the PPP Civic government. We have been on track with that proposal in terms of its execution and implementation, to the extent that facilities were constructed to house the software, the equipment, hardware, software of all the hubs which were expected to be completed by 2015. 2 years down the line, 2018 budget is struggling to once more try to reinvigorate something which for the last two budgets have been they've been speaking about. This is not good enough for indigenous people, particularly youths, particularly in an era of information and technology, whereby we expect by now that many villages and their youth would have been computer literate to a wide extent. The budget also glossed over the support that that is expected to come, and it didn't bring anything new. In fact, it said that they're going to assist or promote the development of hinterland regions and indigenous people. They will continue with the presidential grant, the support for ecotourism and cultural projects, the upgrading of farm-to-market roads, and the provision of all-terrain vehicle, boats and outboard engines. This is something which is a constant. I expected that the budget would bring on board newer and transformative initiatives that will move away now from the foundation which they found, which they inherited, to one where there's going to be a much more accelerated approach in terms of injecting additional investment to induce further or induce employment, so that there can be some jobs being created into the indigenous people's villages so that young people can earn. Again, there is one project which is being touted, coffee for Region 1 in a village called Santa Rosa. In fact, that's my village. I may be very happy that something is going to happen there. But if the implementation and execution has been a dismal failure for 2.5 years, I don't expect any different under this budget and investment for coffee, because I have seen over the last 2.5 years the investment in rice in Monkey Mountain, a failure, the investment in the tomato, dry tomato produce, and the installation of a huge factory in Paramacatai, and all that there is dry tomato trees in the compound of the factory. So if this is all that is being offered in the 2018 budget, for me it's a disappointment. It's pathetic. It shows no real support for indigenous or Amerindian people's development, much less hinterland, closing the gap between hinterland and the coastland. Job creation should have been one of the major hallmark of any investment into Amerindian development. Projects that will create and expand the amount of jobs. And if we talk about the 6 months training program of HAZE, because that has been mentioned in the budget too, and more money is being put towards that, that again did not bring employment. In fact, 6 months of training, and the youths collecting 50,000 extra at the end of their training, at the end of 6 months, and that cannot even be invested in any particular project that has survived over the last 2 years. That project has that project replaced the CSOs, and there's further widespread employment in the hinterland. So there's no relief. One of the things that struck me too is the $500 increase in pension, and I don't want to go into the social sector, but for me, as it relates to indigenous and what impact it will have on the elderly and the indigenous pensioners. If you go to Cameroon, $500 can only purchase 20-ounce bottle of soda or water. That is what it means for an indigenous pensioner who will be collecting $500 extra on their pension, and that is not fair. It is not good enough. With respect to children and youths, I've already said what is happening with the youths with respect to no employment, no generating new projects, but the children, not providing support for hinterland school children has been also a very disastrous happening in the hinterland, because in the hinterland the government has failed to deliver educational supplies in time or on time, and they have failed to deliver school uniforms for the last year. They have failed to pay the sewing groups for the service of producing the uniforms. And what parents had to do is that they were at a loss as how they would support children in school. So for us in the hinterland, I believe that the budget offers no immediate relief to those projects, and no immediate relief to the problems faced in health, education, water, and roads. If you want to propel indigenous and hinterland development, roads are essential. For the last 2.5 years, many of the villages have not been receiving any form of support in kind, in machinery or finances to maintain roads or to keep the roads in order. So communication, transportation of goods and services, and even the few produce have failed to materialize. And in this budget, 2018, again, there is no major support in these areas. So I rest my case. It is a budget which has little for indigenous people. It's a dismal failure as it relates to the continuing projects which they continue to invest in under the various line items, and I would wish that more interest would be paid to real and serious development in the hinterland, because there you have the majority of residents are Amerindians. In fact, more than 90% of the residents are Amerindians, and they too need to enjoy the good life. They too need to be treated fairly and to be provided with adequate service and opportunities, both at the social and economic level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline Sukai. Next speaker will be. This one? That's yours? Yes, go ahead, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Madam Teixeira. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, the sector that I cover as a parliamentary spokesperson, public infrastructure, I would want to limit my interventions today to public infrastructure, which would include roads, bridges, city fences, river transport, air transport, and energy. But I'd like to make 4 observations. Number 1, there is excessive use of the force account to undertake infrastructural works. Whenever the force account is being utilized, there is no external supervision. So that is work being undertaken by the ministry and the ministry's staff. There is no external supervision, and there is very limited checks and balances, and there is serious corruption that is taking place, and I will point that out to you in a few. Secondly, it would appear that the government don't have adequate procurement plans, or if they do have procurement plans, there's an inability to execute those plans, because I have the score sheet of the PSIP, and I will point you to the massive underperformance, mismanagement, incompetence that is taking place. Number 3, political interference of the tendering process has come back to haunt the government, because while they're putting nice big figures in the 2018 budget, I'll point out to you that on several fronts, the expenditure is zero. Zero. They haven't spent a dime on some of the major projects that they spoke about in 2017. And number 4, it would appear that this particular minister, who's in charge of the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, has a difficulty in following the rules, and as a result, foreign-funded projects are lagging behind. Because when you're going to spend money from international agencies, you got to follow the rules. And the fact that you don't like following the rules, we have serious issues there. So let's go to the PSIP. I would like to just deal with 5 of the big areas where lots of monies are allocated and to be spent. The Office of the President, or the Ministry of the Presidency. In the mid-year report, the implementation of the PSIP was at 32%. The minister is saying that by the end of the year it will be 64.8%. Ministry of Public Infrastructure, which is the ministry that I shadow, as of mid-year, the PSIP's implementation was at 30%. 30%. The minister is indicating that by the end of the year it will be at 80%. So you'll move from 30% to 80%. The Ministry of Education, which is another big ministry, the PSIP implementation as of January to June was at 13%, and they're anticipating that it will be at 58% by the end of the year. The Ministry of Public Health, which is another big ministry, as of half year, the PSIP implementation was at 8%, but they're anticipating that it will be at 76% by the end of the year. How laughable. And I just picked two regions, Regions 4 and Regions 10. Region 4, the PSIP implementation as of half year was 33%. They expected that it would be closing at year end at 58%. And Region 10, the PSIP implementation capital projects was at 13% as of half year. And they're saying that it will jump to 68% as of the end of the year. Now, there are a number of observations here. Number one is either that there is no procurement plan or they're unable to execute their procurement plan. Number two is either that jobs are being held back for specific contractors. And number three, it means that at the end of the year, checks are going to be cut for contractors and suppliers, even though goods and services have not been delivered. Because you can't have these budget agency heads or officers who are responsible for procurement unable to execute works in the first 6 months, and then you have this rapid execution in the second half. The minister indicates that his reason for early budgets is to ensure adequate implementation of the budget. So, for the full 12 months implementation. So, is it a case where we have public officers who are lazy, incompetent, incapable of implementing for the first half of the year, and then in the second half, these very same officers all of a sudden have the energy, the zeal, and the zest to get things done. So you're moving from 13% to 68% and the rest of it. So there's something that is radically wrong, and there is executive interference with procurement that needs to be addressed. Now let's deal with the major projects in this country. Last year we heard that we're going to be dealing with the Linden to Lethem Road, and we had lots of talk about that, the Linden to Lethem Road. Well, $50 million was put in the budget for studies. How much has been spent? Not a dime. Not a dime. So it's a pipe dream and an ice cream promise that existed last year that is coming back again this year, and we're going to have more money being put into the budget for this pipe dream and this ice cream promise. The East Bank, East Coast connection, or the East Coast East Bank Road. Last year in the budget, $81 million was allocated for studies. I'm here to tell you, the minister's document says zero was expended. So nothing happened on the East Coast East Bank link. Zero. Oh. You heard about the waterfront development and all the fancy thing about how we're going to be doing waterfront development. Last year in the budget, $50 million was allocated for study. How much was expended? Zero. Zero. The ferry vessels, which is to be funded by India, $85 million was in the budget last year. How much was expended? Zero. So I'm making the point. And when it comes to sea and river defenses, 50% of the money allocated last year was expended or will be expended by December 31st. So I'm talking about massive incompetence, underperformance, and mismanagement. And wherever you see a project is moving, is one where the force account is undertaking the works, where there is no external supervision, and the minister himself has a hand in these particular projects. So we have very serious issues. As it relates to energy, there is no new initiative to solve the blackout situation that we are facing. What we are hearing about is a discussion about 50 megawatts to be generated through natural gas. But there is nothing in the budget to deal with the immediate or short-term issue of blackouts in Guyana. The power utility upgrade program continues to move slowly, and as a result, there is no real impact on this. When it comes to roads and bridges, let's deal with roads first. All of the projects that are going on are projects that were left by the PPPC. The Sheriff Mandela Road that is being touted, that was supposed to be from a $66 million IDB loan that should have been for Sheriff Mandela, Canals 1 and 2, upgrade of Grove to Tamiri, studies, and the East Bank Berbice Road. We are told that $30 million US from that loan has moved to what is now being called a low-income housing settlement 3, where they're building core homes and other things in Sophia and along the corridor, which has not even been approved by the IDB. It has not even been approved by the IDB. So there is an underperformance there. Interesting to note, the Wismar-Linden Bridge, which surfaced early in the year when we were dealing with the Demerara Harbor Bridge, and the minister said that he got mixed up between the two. The studies for the Wismar-Linden Bridge has not been concluded, because you heard the minister's explanation then, and there is nothing in this budget to even do it in 2018. So the Wismar-Linden Bridge is gone off the track. There is no money allocated in any of the capital projects to the Demerara Harbor Bridge, even though the minister says in his budget speech $804 million have been allocated for bridges, that is bridges elsewhere. There is no money in the budget for the Kurupukari crossing. As a matter of fact, that is still at the level of studies. Last year, 50 million was allocated for the studies. Nothing was spent. They have put $224 million in this year's budget, hoping that they will spend some money on the studies. And you will remember that I told you in the studies is jobs for 2 consultants. So there's no real creation of jobs. So sea and river defenses, 50% implemented last year. Bridges, 0. Waterfront development, 0. Road network linking East Coast, East Bank, 0. The only projects that have been moving along are the ones where there is forced account intervention, where the minister has a direct hand, where it's void of external supervision. So the airport is still way behind. Nothing has happened on the ferry vessels. I am really shocked that the minister could say that this is a good budget when major infrastructure projects are lagging behind. We are looking to see what's happening on the West Coast Highway, the East Coast Better Hope to Belfield Road. That, of course, you know, is a project started under the PPPC. And even the 66 million for the Sheriff Mandela, we have significant challenges where that is concerned. And a PSIP that is in big, big trouble and nothing new to help the blackout situation or to advance electrification of Guyana and to bring an end to the blackout woes. Hydroelectricity, even the monies that were spent on the road, there is no new allocation in this year, which is clear that hydroelectricity has been abandoned, and we're still yet to hear how we will achieve 100% renewable electricity supply by 2025 without any significant investment in hydroelectricity. The wind farms that the minister is talking about, there is real serious problems there. because there is no adequate tendering or proper tendering to be able to get the best deal. And we are watching these things very closely. There's a lot more that I can say, but I would want to pause now and probably take your questions, and I'll be speaking to these issues more in the budget debate and even before the budget debate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Bishop Edgehill. The last speaker will be Dr. Vilya Prasad. She is the shadow spokesperson for the social services or social sector, particularly social protection. So I'll ask Bindi to begin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, social services includes the welfare of women, children, the elderly, and those with disabilities. And this budget leaves much to be desired when it comes to having a meaningful impact on any one of those groups of people. We have to note also that these are the most vulnerable in our country. In fact, in 26,000 words in the budget, and not one paragraph was dedicated to issues affecting women. And I think when women continue to be sidelined, it's not conducive to sustainable economic development and progress. We are well aware that in recent times, and even before then, women have been facing serious issues, including those to do with literacy, those to do with employment, those to do with things like abuse, harassment, and rape. And none of these things were dealt with in the budget speech of the minister. In fact, looking through the budget speech, one would be likely to think that women's welfare is hunky-dory in the country. It is not. With less than 30% of women involved in economic activities in this country, as espoused by the ILO report, I can say that if we move to the rural communities or even in the urban communities of Guyana, women are not employed in many meaningful ways in this country. There has been no program advanced in this year's budget to help women to become employable. No training programs, no programs for the development of women in any tangible way. Women are still locked out of the working force, and even those women, and there are women and many women who have made strides professionally and academically, those women are still denied jobs. Young women out of school cannot access jobs, so they comprise a significant component of the youth population. So youths are still starved of employment. There is talk about training, but there is no talk about generation of employment for young people and young women. If there are women in the professional sphere, in terms of their working environment, there is much to be desired. We were all familiar not so long ago of the issue of those women who worked as guards and the response from one of the ministers, which was shut down then by the government. That is still a festering issue. There is no infrastructure to deal with instances of abuse, harassment, or anything that affects women and their dignity in the working environment. In fact, when we look at the women in Guyana, there are many single mothers, many single parents. Nothing has been advanced to deal with women who continue to struggle to make ends meet, to provide for their children. If we look at housing, for example, the housing program has gone on an all-time spiral downwards. And what has been advanced in terms of measures for housing is a housing unit to the value of $6.5 million. And that will only have exemptions from VAT if it is done by the government or any approved entity by CHPA. To me, that is terrible, because already the salaries out there are not much to begin with. And one of the things people could have looked forward to was owning their own homes. In the last budget, you had a tax exhausted population. And in this budget, you're saying, well, there are no new taxes. But what else are you going to tax? And in fact, people are worried about the impending increase in property tax. And we're talking about not only single women, but we're talking about people who have been widowed, who will have to deal with all of these things. And if there's an increase in building materials, there's no drive to improve the housing for families and women, then where do you leave people? And that's just talking about women. If we look at the elderly, for example, $500 on pension. What can that buy for an elderly person? I'd have to agree with Pauline that probably soda, which elderly people shouldn't be using too much, or maybe a bottle or two of water. And yet there is talk about letting the pension be paid through electronic mobile money. Now, for that to even happen, the elderly person needs to buy a phone. $500 adding on to your pension, obviously that can't buy a phone. So where is the benefit to the elderly people? There is no subvention on electricity, there is no subvention on water, they still have to pay everything else like everyone else, they still have to deal with VAT. Now you're telling them to buy a phone, and that's how we're helping them to get their pension. To me, this is a slap in the face of the elderly people. It shows no care and compassion for the elderly folks in Guyana. And let's look at old age pension. There has been an increase of $148 million from previous figure. Compare that to other increases on other things that government has allotted money to. Compare that to about $103 million that has been allotted to the dietary figures for the ministry. I mean, you're talking about the whole
103 million national events.
$103 million to national events, rather. That is telling us that there is more weight being put on things like events and maybe flags flying and God knows what, and less emphasis being placed on the elderly. Compare the two figures. Compare that also to $488 million for the dietary budget. Compare that to $722 million increase for security. I think with regards to elderly, they have been put on the back burner. Let's talk about people with disabilities, people who require public assistance, $8,000. Now remember, in all of this, there is no removal of the taxes on health care. So there is a severe shortage in the public system right now in terms of medication. And I know this on a personal level because through the Social Sector Committee in Parliament, I would have been visiting along with the other members of Parliament several hospitals across this country. The shelves are empty. People have been told to take their bandages for dressings, and we do know that our elderly suffer from chronic illnesses. So now they have to pay taxes on health services that they have to get outside of the public system if they are to maintain a quality life in terms of health care. And also, they still have the challenges of paying for everything else. So I think when we look at the elderly, that's a problem. People who have to depend on public assistance, $8,000 is very little in the face of everything that they have to pay. And I think those persons who are listening, these are not things or figures that don't have a meaning for people, because people are pinching at their dollars to live and to survive. There's a big hue and cry in the measures in the budget with regards to education, that there has been a removal of the VAT on educational services. But the government put that on in the first place. So why should that be touted as something that is wonderful? It's not. You caused hardship, and now you're trying to say, well, we come bearing gifts to remove the hardship that you caused. So when we look holistically at what's being offered in the budget for women, for children, for the elderly, for persons with disabilities, I think there are many, many gaps. And it does not at all address the needs of the population, the needs of the vulnerable in the population, and the needs of people who are heavily, heavily taxed. Only the other day I was speaking to someone who is from Region 5, and he said to me, I'm a farmer, and the cash crops are not getting much sale. I'm not able to even derive much income from what I'm planting. When is this going to end? When we're all penniless? Even if I want to start a business. And if you look at the continuing thread in the budget, there's a lot of talk about young people becoming entrepreneurs. To become an entrepreneur, you have to invest. You have to invest. So if people don't have money to invest, then how are they going to invest? And secondly, if they have no one to buy what they're selling, how are they going to gain an income? So it's like you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think when we sit here in the National Assembly and we represent people out there, I think the government needs to listen and to listen well, because these are things that are really, really bothering people on a daily basis. It comes up to a toss-up. Can I do this or can I do that? And young professionals are also facing this because they have to make ends meet, and even they might be a doctor or they might be someone who is an engineer and all of this, but you would think, having studied, having gained a profession, and having been employed as a professional, they would have an ease in the burden that life brings with it, but it hasn't come. It hasn't come. So I think the journey to a good life, as is brought to us, continues. We've been hearing about this good life all the time. I don't know when we will get to the good life that is being espoused by this government, because I don't think anybody's enjoying good life. And I think people who are in ministries need to come out of their high towers and go out into the grassroots and see how people are having a hard life. They need to do that. And if we look at the PSIP for social protection ministry, by January to July it was 17%, only 17%, and by the end of the year it will be less than 50%. So it's complete underperformance, complete mismanagement, and complete disregard of the things that makes life turn on its wheels on a daily basis. Because you have to eat, you have to live, you have to provide for your children, you have to get health care. If you are an older or aged person, you have the added burden of perhaps getting more medication than the average householder. And it really is a burden on people. And I feel as if I am a broken record, because I've been saying the same thing for every budget. Every single budget, it's the same thing I'm saying.
Under this government.
Under this government. Under this government, I've been saying the same thing. And obviously, they're not listening. They're not listening to what the needs are of the people. So is it that women don't matter? The future of the children is not important? Is it that we're going to be feted, or certain people be feted by more events while the pensioners get $500? Ministers will get more increases? Well, I hope not, because 50% versus 2% on a pension, I mean, that is just unsatisfactory, unacceptable. And I think many people who have elderly parents understand the struggles that they're going through. Even if you have 2 pensioners in the home, you're talking about $38,000 to run the home, especially if that's all they have left. If you look at the sugar industry and the imminent closure of the estates, what is happening to those women who depend on their husbands to bring home an income? What happens to them? Have there been any programs or any thought given to how you can develop something for those women so that they can earn an income? Talking about thousands of women who will now have to wonder how they'll put food on the table. So I think I've said a lot, and I get very passionate about this, because when you talk to people every day, these are the things that are very close to home. Sometimes you talk about macroeconomics and you talk about all these things. It goes over the head of a lot of people, but they understand what it means when they have to pay a light bill, they have to pay their water rate, they have to find food, and they have to find medicine for their children. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Clearly, if I were Minister Jordan, after spending over $300,000 for each, what do you call, billboard, I would have been embarrassed to stand up in the National Assembly and read this budget. It is a budget that it belongs to the government, obviously, it's not Mr. Jordan's personally, which is a reflection of how uncaring this government is and how, in fact, it has not worked towards inclusivity, as Mr. Jordan points out in his speech and talks about inclusion and so on, and social cohesion. In fact, the government is guilty of major areas of exclusion of people based on ethno-political discrimination. And if you just look at the composition of the boards, the composition of the ministries, particularly at the highest levels, the number of advisors, the number of foreign advisors, etc., that it is far from a far cry from any inclusivity and representation of the diversity of Guyana. Just to bolster what my colleague Vindy talked about, and yes, it is a macroeconomic figure, but that when Mr. Jordan said there'd be no new taxes, and some people felt good about that, unfortunately, by not removing any the taxes, only the one on VAT on education, that in fact 10 billion last year, this year, $10.7 billion was removed from people's disposable income. So everybody in Guyana, you sitting in this room, all of us, contributed to this $10.7 billion. It was taken out of our pockets by new taxes, new fees, new licenses, etc. Now that continues in 2018. That hasn't been removed. So we're going to continue to give 10-point-something billion or maybe 11 billion based on the increase of cost, etc. So just to tie that in, that the situation isn't going to change. When you read the motion that we put forward and the figures we presented, which were October the 5th figures, based on the mid-year report, that in fact the figures the minister have come with are practically probably a little worse than our figures. And we took them from their official reports. To graphically give some additional things, and that is that one of the indications of a good life and indications of poverty reduction is the status of children, the status of infant mortality, maternal mortality, child mortality. And for some strange reason, child mortality has gone up, for some strange reason, and no one's talking about it. And why is that taking place? In addition to that, you're the journalist here. If you go to the Appendix 1 in the budget document, one of the most telling figures for me as a former Minister of Health is the fall, the drastic fall in immunization rates. Immunization in this country is one of the cheapest programs and one of the most long-term major investment in children's health and preventing diseases that are preventable. We have dropped from what was 100%, almost 100% in 2014. It dropped in 2015 to 90-something. It went down in 2017 to, what are you talking about, BCG, TB, which is absolutely required in Guyana for a baby born. It's down to 65%, which means that the risk of babies dying from tuberculosis is going to increase, particularly with HIV/AIDS available in the environment. Polio. I cannot believe that polio dropped to 72%. Since the 60s, when we had the polio epidemic, polio vaccination has been absolutely essential in this country, and in fact it has dropped to 72. MMR has dropped to 69, and DPT dropped to, which is diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, no? Typhoid, DPT, 72%. So these are figures that are indicative of not a good life. In fact, of a deterioration of the standard of living and the quality of life of our people in this country. And so these are just some vignettes I wanted to share with you. This is the uncaring government. They're not listening to people. They're also, as you go through the budget, I trust you, the journalists of this country, to do your little investigations, which I'm sure you're very capable of doing. And that is, if you look at Mazaruni Prison, The whole thing on the Camp Street motion, which we have on the order paper since July to be debated, and the recommendations to do with that. It talks about allocations for the prison service. However, although the Ministry of Home Affairs has gone to tender for Mazroni Prison with a revised engineer's estimate of 3.1 billion, only 1.5 for the entire prison system for the coming year. And so money that was allocated for Mazroni hasn't even been spent, as Bishop was talking about. Furthermore, they talk about in the budget about constructing a new Georgetown prison in the year, in 2018. There's no money for that. So there are a lot of fluff. What do they say? There's a lot of fluff in the budget speech. There's a lot of statistics, and there are a lot of lies. And that's what we're coming down to in the 2018 budget, and that's why the coinage of behind the figures, to look at what is the reality in the budget, what is the reality in the numbers, and what is the reality in our country, in the state of our country at this point. What we are clear of is that, and Mr. Jagdeo at the first press conference we had immediately after the budget pointed out where are the vulnerabilities in the economy with the way in which the government is expending funds, including from the current account, our debt payments, etc. So I want to stop there, open the floor, and just one comment before I forget, and that is that we will have other MPs, because there's 17 of us who are spokespersons for sectors in the House, and that we will be organizing during the week, because the general debate is next week between 10 and 10, and then the following week estimates from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. as well, that we will be organizing some kind of a collection of MPs, other MPs who have other sectoral responsibilities during the coming week, so that you'll be able to get these vignettes or glimpses of insights into the budget as we see it. So I'd like to now thank you and open the floor.
Yes.
You have a number of issues. Example, the whole question of the future of the structure of the force. It seems as though there are moves being contemplated to restructure the Guyana police force. I mean, the internal structure I'm speaking about. What is going to happen there is anyone's guess. That's number two. The anti-crime section within the police force, as well as the CID, are also expected to come under scrutiny based on what the COI recommended, and also the whole question of the direction in which the force should go. So apart from those internal issues, you have the direction in which the force should be moving. Right now, my understanding is there's a lot of confusion within the force, because what is happening, we're getting mixed signals from the Ministry of Public Security. We're getting signals from the Ministry of the Presidency. A lot of issues that's supposed to be processed, that are expected to be being processed within the force, that's not taking place as well.
Jamal Baker, HTP 19 News. Mr. Oli, on the topic of public security, now there's, in the public security budget, there have been allocations for the prisons mostly. I know Mr. Sherry touched on it before, but I want to know your views on it, specifically with the funds being made for high-tech security checks at the county prison, and also money being allocated for Mazroni.
Yeah, I noticed that too in the speech. There are about 5 paragraphs dealing with public safety and security, 3 of which are dedicated to prisons, 1 to the citizen security, and 1 to fire. I'm not very sure. That tells me I'm not very sure what direction the public safety and security policy orientation is heading. Because it would seem to me, and that's why I didn't want to deal with figures at this point in time. When we look at the allocation to actually the Ministry of Public Security, it is nothing much compared to what it used to be under the PDPC. So it appears as though the Ministry of Public Security, which is the civilian body that is expected to be leading these organizations, will be playing a much more low-key role in the new dispensation that is being contemplated by the Ministry of the Presidency. Your question of promotions as well. This is a big question, within the Ghana Police Force. This year we're not going to get any promotion as we expected every year. And because that has been put on hold as a result of the interference by the Ministry of Public Security with the court pronouncement. So these are some of the issues, and therefore the prioritization of the resources is what is of concern to me. Having had what I might call a first glance of the numbers in terms of the allocation. Another observation that I've made in respect to the allocation is that it may deal with infrastructural issues in relation to the prison, infrastructural issues in relation to the one paragraph in the Ghana Police Force and the fire service as well. There is no clear policy guidelines by the Ministry of Finance as to the direction in which the government, I'm not talking only about the Ministry of Public Security. Of course, we'll hear more from Mr. Ramzan when he speaks. But I would expect that in a policy paper like this, vis-a-vis the budget speech, we would have gotten a much more visionary projection in respect to the expectations of the citizens in respect of public safety and security.
You said in your statement that you talked about the alleged dismissal of police.
I spoke about what?
The alleged dismissal of civil officers. The public security minister said, and I read it well, he said to our newscast and to other newscasts that he had several days left back on his leave.
He had what?
Several days left
Leave.
on his leave, and
Yeah.
so we had to use up those days.
Mm.
Now, with the statement being made...
But let me just say something, sir.
Let him finish.
Leave.
I'm not finished.
No, but let me just correct you because you might be wasting the time. Leave is something that you need to request to take. Whenever you are sent on leave, in itself is a disciplinary action. Even if you have your annual leave and you didn't request it and you're ordered to go on your leave, that in itself is something that needs to be looked at.
Okay, can you?
Yes, as I was saying. Do you
Yeah.
agree that there is do you believe that there's an effort to say, to target senior members of the force? Do you believe that?
Public service rules say that leave is service. Leave is service. So if you set a person off on leave, which in the first instance I'm saying, you're in a sense interrupting the service. Now, the excuse that was used is that he's being sent on leave to allow the Ghana Police Force's Christmas plan.
To go ahead.
A bundle
In the
of
public
BS.
Hogwash.
No, he said in the public interest.
In the public
He was
interest.
sent on leave in the
First they
public
said the public
interest.
interest, then they said the Christmas plan. Then they said police reform. Right? Now, the Commissioner of Police and Deputy Commissioner of Police are appointed by the President based on recommendations that are made to him. So the president's come. But what he did,
With the leader opposition, by the way.
yeah, what he did was to use the Minister of Public Security as the handmaiden to execute what he should have been doing. Okay? Now, we will have to wait and see whether, if at all, the Commissioner of Police, the substantive Commissioner of Police, how he will, and if he will react. I think by February, when his leave ends, because what is a little confusing also is that on the one hand they don't appear to want him there, but on the other they say he will come back. To do what? This is what people are asking. So that's why I'm saying there's a lot of confusion within the leadership of the Ghana Police Force as to what is it this government really wants of that organization. Is it a question of politicking? Is it a question of preparing for the next elections? All these are issues that are up in the air and have to be answered at some point, will be answered by virtue of displays of action by the force and the government.
So, Mr. Edger, you're saying that...
Now, can you go through me the questions, please?
Yeah.
I still happen to be the moderator sitting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Edger, I just made a statement while I was asking the question. Do you think that it's a breach of the labor laws, the action that's taken to send Mr. Delano part of the rest of the league?
Let's just cut all that and say this. The Constitution is very clear on this issue. The Constitution is very clear on this. And we have already said, as written by Anil Nandalal and others, that this is a breach of the Constitution. So it's not labor laws, it's also all the public service rules and so on. But the minister, a commissioner of police, is appointed through the Public Service Commission by the president after consulting the leader opposition. And there's a reason, if some of you are old enough to remember, when Henry Green became commissioner of police after Mr. Felix retired, that Henry Green could not have been appointed fully, he was acting, because the then leader opposition, Mr. Corbyn, was not in support of him. So the removal or appointment of the Commissioner of Police is a constitutional matter enshrined in the Constitution. The removal of a Commissioner of Police requires a tribunal. Therefore, let's assume you have a commission of inquiry and it says all bad things. The President, the Prime Minister, then has to set up a tribunal. That is, the Constitution says how it's comprised, it's structured, and that makes a decision, investigates, and says to the President yes or no. If it says no, the President can't do anything. Nobody can do anything. So if a President can't do it, how is a minister to do it? Because, of course, the executive power lies in the President. So, in fact, the issue is that, as far as we're concerned, this is a breach of the Constitution, just like they did it with the Public Service Commission, Police Service Commission, when they stopped the appointment, and we feel vindicated with the position taken by the Chief Justice recently in her ruling. And we are concerned, as Roy expressed, deeply, profoundly concerned about what the government's strategy is in relation to the civilian law enforcement office bodies, which is the Guyana Police Force. We noticed the increase in allocations for the GDF, but we're very concerned with the predominance of ex-military people in various positions. Why is the civilian law enforcement, whether headed by ex-commissioner of police or Y-commissioner of police or whatever, why is it being treated in this manner? And so there are many questions, as Roy said, and deep and profound concerns in the direction, a direction the government appears to be going in. Okay, so thank you. Any other questions? Starbuck News, you're awfully quiet today. Oh, you have the flu too? Okay, you look as if you have the flu. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to you next week. You will be, I notice, 10 o'clock to 10 o'clock.